All right, we're going to talk about the Russian Revolution. During World War One, Russia was a member of the Triple Entente, which later became the Allies, and they had to leave towards the middle of the war, a little bit towards the end, but in the middle of the fighting, Russia said, "Peace out," and they left. They were going through a lot before World War One, and they continued to go through a lot after World War One. And so we're going to look at the issues that were going on in Russia, called the Russian Revolution. So in 1917, the war had been going on for about 3 years, and everybody was suffering. Remember that they thought that this war was only going to last a couple weeks. It was going to be a good little war, and then everybody would go back to their own countries. And that's not going to happen. So by 1917, total war is creating huge problems. People thought that they were prepared for war, but they hadn't seen a war like this before, in which it is just devastating. And so the economies of all of the countries involved are falling apart. They don't have any money to keep going. However, only Russia experienced just a complete collapse to the point where they felt as though they must drop out. And out of that collapse came internal issues that they had. It wasn't just lack of money. They were going through a lot of issues, like I said, before the war, and they're going to continue after the war as well to definitely have some issues. So, a little bit of background about what's going on in Russia at this time. As other countries in Europe were industrializing and they were rapidly increasing their militaries, and the rest of Europe is kind of beefing up, Russia did not want to be left behind. So they, between 1863 and 1900, tried to catch up with the rest of Europe, and so they had rapid industrialization. Now, that's a good thought. Let's catch up. Let's be able to compete industrially with the rest of Europe and then eventually the world. However, they weren't really ready to do that. And so in Russia, it led to absolutely horrible working conditions, extremely low wages, and child labor. Now, we mentioned in the Industrial Revolution before that those were issues that were going on in other European countries, especially Great Britain, a couple hundred years before, 150 years before. And so it's not like this is unique for Russia to experience these issues. However, it happens at a time in which they're also trying to fight a world war. And so that's going to be a major problem. So the people of Russia working in these factories in poor conditions didn't want to work for no money and be exploited. And so many of the workers in Russia's factories went on strike, which is generally peaceful protest. You're basically saying, I'm not going to work, and you can't make me work. That also meant that they weren't going to get any money, but it was something that they felt like was a good cause. And so people in Russia, and especially the industrial cities, really started supporting workers. And there are two groups of people that emerge. One is called the Mensheviks, and they want things to change. And then the other one is the Bolsheviks, and they also want things to change. The difference between the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks is that the Mensheviks want some change. They want the things that they're upset about to change. We'll call that moderate change. But the Bolsheviks didn't want just little bits of change. They wanted a complete overhaul of the system. So they wanted extreme change. So in 1905, and this is going to be 9 years before World War I starts, these workers in the city of St. Petersburg, 22,000 of them, decided that they were going to protest the working conditions and they protested outside the Tsar's winter palace. And so the protest was supposed to be generally peaceful. They just want better working conditions. And Tsar Nicholas II looks out of his palace windows and sees them protesting and makes a really horrible choice and orders his troops to shoot into the crowds. Basically show them who's boss, get them out of here. They can't just protest outside of my palace. And in their orders and to shoot into the crowds, to disperse the crowds, the guards killed 1,000 people. This definitely did not help the fact that the people were upset about the conditions, but to put it bluntly, it did shut them up and sent them back to their jobs. So Tsar Nicholas thought, my plan worked. I also want to mention that when we were talking about World War I said that the Russian people felt like they were the protector of the Slavic people, which are the people that are in Serbia, and that's one of the reasons why World War I started, is that the Russians felt like they had to protect all the people. However, that's not really the Russian people. That's more Tsar Nicholas II. So the entire population of Russia is not Slavic. And a lot of them did not feel an allegiance to the Serbian people. Tsar Nicholas II himself was Slavic, and so he felt an allegiance to the people of Serbia. But the majority of the Russian people are not Slavic, and they're like, we have our own issues. We do not want to go and help out people in another country. So generally speaking, the Russians did not support the war. Okay, we know that Tsar Nicholas II is a dictator. He is an autocratic, absolute monarch who doesn't give any power to anyone else. Now, we've learned about kings like that before, and what generally happens is that their people are going to rise up and rebel. Russia thought that they were prepared for the war. They had pre-mobilization, mobilization. However, they didn't quite realize that the rest of Europe was as far advanced as they were. So Russia is not prepared militarily or technologically for the war that's going to happen. In 1915, a year after the war, Russia is involved, and Tsar Nicholas II decides that he's going to take personal charge of the military. He had no training, and probably that was another bad choice. And the Tsar went to the front lines, basically left his palace, left Russia, and went, wasn't in any extreme danger. But he went to the front lines and left the responsibilities of running the Russian government to his wife, Alexandra. So while he doesn't have any experience militarily, she doesn't have any experience running a government. And so that's going to be another issue why Russia is going to fall. So the conditions in Russia before, during, and even after World War I, the people are going to have few rights. They're going to be in extreme poverty. The military is going to be disastrous. They think they're ready, but they don't know what German ready is. And those Germans are definitely going to be ready. It's a society of have versus have-nots, meaning that you have the rich and you have the poor. People have stuff or people have nothing. They don't really trust the government. Tsar Nicholas II had proven, especially killing people on Bloody Sunday, that he doesn't really care about the people. They have awful wages, awful work conditions. In the middle of the war, they don't see any out. They're hopeless to win. And the peasants are sick of life. They are sick of things being taken advantage of. They're sick of the government, and they just want something new. Okay, another thing that I didn't mention during World War I is that the Russians are so ill prepared. We said that they tried to industrialize militarily, but they just were so far behind. Many soldiers going to what we would call like basic training, they didn't have enough weapons to train people in basic training and also fight the war. So in the middle of the war, many Russian soldiers are trained to fight using broomsticks instead of real guns. Now, I don't have to tell you that why that would cause an issue. The only thing a broomstick and a gun have in common is a general shape. But clearly, broomsticks don't fire. Clearly, they're not as heavy. And so the Russians are just really ill prepared. Other soldiers are sent to the front lines, like with people shooting at them without rifles, and they're told to just pick one up from a dead soldier. The Russians are not prepared. So ill-led and ill-armed, the Russian army suffered incredible losses. The first 2 years of the war, 2 million Russians died. And I don't necessarily have the statistic of how many people from other groups died, but it is not even going to be close to how many casualties the Russians had. By 1917, the will to fight had vanished, and Russia is going to drop out of the war. I'll go ahead and stop there, and I will pick up on video number 2.